214 families had tried to take her home. Not one succeeded. By the end of this rainy Thursday, the shelter had already decided it was time to stop hoping. The storm arrived before sunrise, rolling in from the Pacific and draping the Oregon coastline beneath a blanket of silver fog. Rain tapped softly against the shelter windows. Wind rattled the chain-link fences outside. The scent of wet cedar drifted through the ventilation system, mixing with disinfectant, old blankets, and the familiar smell of dogs waiting for second chances. Most mornings began the same way at Harbor Pines Animal Rescue. Volunteers unlocked kennels. Food bowls clinked against concrete floors. Excited barking echoed through the corridors as hopeful tails wagged for attention. But one kennel remained different from all the others. At the far end of the building, away from the playful puppies and newly rescued strays, an aging German shepherd sat quietly beside a narrow window. Her name on the paperwork was Case 47. That was all most people knew. 11 years old. Female. Good health for her age. No aggression. No behavioral issues. Yet somehow impossible to adopt. Her sable coat had faded over the years. Gray now covered much of her muzzle. One ear carried an old tear near the tip. Her amber eyes remained sharp, though they seemed focused on something no one else could see. Every morning, she sat in the same place. Every afternoon, she watched the same road. Every evening, she waited until darkness settled over the parking lot before finally lying down to sleep. Nobody understood why. Shelter manager Linda Mercer had spent 23 years helping abandoned animals find homes. She had witnessed fearful dogs learn trust. She had watched injured animals recover against impossible odds. Yet Case 47 baffled her more than any animal she had ever met. Families loved the shepherd immediately. Children offered toys. Retired couples brought treats. Veterans sat beside her kennel for hours. She accepted their kindness politely. Then she refused to leave with them. Not once. Not ever. Some dogs barked when frightened. Some hid. Some became anxious around strangers. This shepherd did none of those things. She simply looked past people, as if searching for someone else. Earlier that morning, another family had visited. A father. A mother. Two daughters carrying a bright red leash wrapped with a blue bow. The younger girl had knelt beside the kennel and whispered promises through the bars. Long walks. Soft beds. Birthday treats. Endless affection. The old shepherd listened quietly. Then she turned toward the window and stared at the road beyond the rain. 20 minutes later, the family left with tears in their eyes. They adopted another dog instead. Linda watched their SUV disappear through the gate before looking back toward the shepherd. 214, she whispered. The number felt unreal now. 214 opportunities. 214 homes. 214 chances to leave this lonely place behind. Yet the shepherd remained exactly where she had always been. Waiting. For what? Nobody knew. A decision had finally been made that morning. By next week, Case 47 would be transferred to a senior sanctuary nearly 80 miles inland. The facility was kind, peaceful, comfortable, but everyone understood what the transfer truly meant. It was where forgotten dogs went when hope had quietly run out. The rain intensified against the glass. The shepherd lifted her head. Her ears twitched slightly. Not toward the thunder. Not toward the barking dogs. Toward the shelter entrance. Linda followed her gaze automatically. Nothing stood there. No visitors. No volunteers. Just an empty doorway framed by gray afternoon light. Still, something about the dog's expression felt different. Alert. Expectant. Almost hopeful. As if somewhere beyond the storm, a familiar presence had finally begun moving closer. And for the first time in 7 long years, the old German shepherd did not look like a dog waiting for a future. She looked like someone waiting for a specific person to come back. The old leather collar should have fallen apart years ago. That was what puzzled everyone. Rain, time, countless cleanings, and 11 years of where should have reduced it to scraps. Yet it remained fastened around the German shepherd's neck like a relic from another life. The leather had darkened with age and salt air. The metal buckle carried a thin layer of rust. Faded stitching barely held the edges together. There was no visible name, no readable tag, no registration number, nothing that could explain where she came from or who she once belonged to. Still, whenever anyone attempted to remove it, the shepherd reacted in a way she never reacted to anything else. She did not growl. She did not snap. She simply stepped away and pressed herself against the back wall of her kennel, her amber eyes fixed on the collar as if protecting something precious. After enough failed attempts, the staff stopped trying. Linda often wondered if the collar was the only possession the dog had left from a forgotten past. Outside, the afternoon rain continued falling steadily across Harbor Pines Animal Rescue. Water streamed from gutters. Wind bent the tops of cedar trees beyond the fence line. The shelter gradually settled into its familiar rhythm as visitors drifted home and volunteers completed their evening routines. In Kennel 47, the shepherd remained beside the window. Her eyes followed every vehicle entering the property. A delivery truck, a veterinarian's sedan, a volunteer arriving late for her shift. One after another. None were the one she wanted. Nobody noticed the pattern except Linda. For 7 years, she had watched this dog study every arrival with the same quiet intensity. Hope appeared for a brief second, then vanished. Again and again, day after day. Sometimes Linda imagined what the shepherd's life might have been before arriving here. Maybe she had belonged to a family that moved away. Maybe she had become lost during a storm. Maybe someone loved her once and spent years searching. Nobody knew. The records from her arrival offered few clues. A rescue volunteer had discovered her wandering near an abandoned service road almost 200 miles south of the shelter. No identification, no microchip, no missing pet reports matching her description. Only the collar. Always the collar. Linda remembered the first day clearly. The shepherd had arrived exhausted, but calm, frightened but dignified. She accepted food immediately. Water too. Yet when volunteers opened the kennel door and encouraged her toward a grassy exercise yard, she refused. Instead, she sat facing the parking lot entrance and waited. Nearly an hour passed before she finally moved. It was almost as if she believed someone would return for her at any moment. 7 years later, very little had changed. Near closing time, a young volunteer named Megan entered the kennel carrying fresh blankets. The shepherd watched politely as the bedding was replaced. Megan smiled and knelt beside her. "You know, I still think somebody out there misses you." The dog tilted her head slightly. The movement was small, barely noticeable, yet it encouraged Megan enough to continue. "Maybe they are looking too. Maybe they just do not know where you are." For a moment, the shelter seemed unusually quiet. Rain tapped against the window. A distant door closed somewhere down the hallway. Then the shepherd slowly turned her gaze toward the entrance again. Megan followed her eyes and sighed. The same direction. Every single time. As she stood to leave, something caught her attention. A tiny section of stitching along the underside of the collar had loosened. Just enough to reveal the edge of something hidden beneath the folded leather. Not a tag. Not exactly. More like a narrow strip tucked carefully inside years ago. Megan crouched again, curiosity growing. Before she could examine it further, the shepherd gently rose and stepped away, positioning herself between the volunteer and the collar. Not aggressive, protective, deliberate. Megan blinked in surprise. She had never seen the old dog move that quickly, and for the first time, she wondered if the worn collar carried more than memories. Perhaps it carried a secret nobody had noticed for 7 years. 300 miles north, Noah Walker was trying very hard not to think about the past. The rain had followed him all morning. It streaked across the windshield of his aging Ford pickup as he drove along Highway 101, winding through forests of towering spruce and stretches of rugged coastline where waves crashed against black rocks. Below, the ocean usually brought him peace. Today it only brought memories. At 36 years old, Noah carried himself with the quiet discipline of a man who had spent much of his life serving others. His dark brown hair was shorter than most civilians preferred. A faint scar traced the edge of his jawline. His shoulders remained broad from years of physical training, though the stiffness in his left knee reminded him every morning that time moved forward whether people wanted it to or not. He lived alone in a small cedar house overlooking a narrow inlet outside Newport. The place was simple. 1 bedroom, a wood stove, a porch facing the water. No photographs decorated the walls. No family portraits filled the shelves. Visitors often described the house as peaceful. Noah sometimes thought another word fit better. Empty. For years he had filled the silence with routine. Early morning runs, volunteer work, repairs around town, fishing when the weather cooperated. Anything to keep moving. Anything to avoid lingering too long on old questions that no longer had answers. Some losses eventually become part of a person. Not healed, not forgotten, simply carried. That afternoon, he parked outside a small hardware store and stepped into the drizzle. As he crossed the parking lot, a woman called his name. Noah. He turned and smiled politely. It was Claire Bennett, director of a local veterans outreach program. They had worked together on several community projects over the past year. Claire balanced 2 paper coffee cups in her hands and offered him one. "You still look like a man who forgot how to take a day off." Noah laughed softly. "I am working on it." Not very successfully. They stood beneath the store awning while rain tapped against the metal roof overhead. For a few minutes they talked about volunteer schedules and upcoming charity events. Then Claire studied him carefully. "Harbor Pines needs help this weekend." Noah took a sip of coffee. "The animal shelter? They are short on volunteers." He looked away toward the gray ocean horizon. Claire recognized the hesitation immediately. "You do not have to adopt anything." "That was not what I was thinking." But both of them knew it was. Years earlier, Noah had shared his life with a dog unlike any other. A partner, a companion, a constant presence through some of the most important years of his life. Losing her had left a space that never quite closed. He rarely spoke about it now. Most people assumed enough time had passed. Most people were wrong. Claire softened her voice. "Sometimes helping something else heal helps us too." Noah stared into the rain for several seconds. Wind carried the scent of salt water across the parking lot. Somewhere nearby a gull cried overhead. Finally he nodded once. "What time should I be there?" Claire smiled. "Saturday morning." Neither noticed the expression that crossed Noah's face afterward. It lasted only a moment. A flicker of uncertainty. A feeling he could not explain. Almost as if some invisible thread had shifted somewhere far beyond the horizon. That evening, as darkness settled over the Oregon coast, Noah drove home along the shoreline. Meanwhile, 80 miles away at Harbor Pines Animal Rescue, an aging German Shepherd remained awake beside her kennel window. Rain streaked the glass. The old leather collar rested against her silver muzzle. And for reasons nobody could understand, she continued staring toward the road as though she somehow knew that after 7 years of waiting, the distance between 2 forgotten souls had finally begun to close. Saturday arrived beneath a sky the color of weathered steel. Low clouds drifted over the coast while a cool breeze carried the scent of rain and salt water inland. Harbor Pines Animal Rescue opened at 8 o'clock sharp. Volunteers moved through the hallways preparing kennels, folding blankets, and filling stainless steel bowls with fresh water. The building slowly awakened to the familiar sounds of barking dogs and friendly conversation. Yet Kennel 47 remained unchanged. The aging German Shepherd sat beside her window exactly where she had been the evening before. Her amber eyes watched the entrance with patient determination. She ignored toys, ignored treats, ignored every distraction the shelter offered. Waiting had become its own routine. Across the years, dozens of people had tried to understand her. Some believed she suffered from anxiety. Others suspected trauma. A few claimed she simply preferred solitude. None of the explanations felt complete. The truth was simpler and far more difficult to measure. She was not avoiding a future. She was holding on to a past. Around mid-morning, a family arrived from Salem hoping to adopt a dog. Their young son immediately noticed the German Shepherd. The boy could not have been older than 9. Freckles covered his cheeks. A baseball cap sat crooked on his head. He stopped in front of the kennel and smiled. She looked smart. His parents exchanged uncertain glances. Linda approached quietly. "She is very smart." "Can we meet her?" the boy asked. Linda hesitated only briefly before opening the gate. The shepherd stepped forward calmly. Her posture remained relaxed. She accepted the boy's gentle touch, allowed him to scratch behind her ears, even took a small treat from his hand. For nearly 15 minutes, everything seemed promising. The family laughed. The boy spoke excitedly about hiking trails and backyard games. Linda found herself wondering if perhaps today would finally be different. Then it happened again. A volunteer opened the front entrance to welcome new visitors. The shepherd immediately turned away. Her attention shifted completely. She walked past the family, past the treats, past the open kennel gate, returning directly to her place beside the window where she could see the parking lot. The boy watched in confusion. "Did I do something wrong?" Linda knelt beside him. "No, sweetheart." "Then why does she keep looking outside?" Linda searched for an answer. None came, because she had asked herself the same question for 7 years. The family eventually left carrying adoption papers for a cheerful Labrador mix. The German Shepherd remained exactly where she was. As noon approached, Megan returned to the kennel. Thoughts of the hidden stitching beneath the collar had lingered in her mind all week. She crouched nearby holding a soft brush and spoke gently. The shepherd remained calm, trusting, familiar. Carefully, Megan examined the worn leather from a different angle. There, it was again, a narrow fold concealed inside the collar lining. Tiny, almost invisible. Whatever had been tucked there years ago remained hidden beyond reach. The stitching was too fragile to force open without damaging the collar itself. Megan sat back and sighed. "What are you hiding?" The dog blinked slowly but offered no answer. Outside, another vehicle entered the parking lot. The shepherd stood instantly, ears raised, body alert. Hope flickered across her face before fading once more. Not the right person. Not this time. Megan followed the dog's gaze and felt an unexpected sadness. 7 years was a long time to believe in something. Most people would have given up. Most people would have forgotten. Yet somehow this old shepherd continued waking every morning convinced tomorrow might be different. Somewhere along the coast, Noah Walker was finishing breakfast before preparing for his volunteer shift. He glanced at the address Claire had texted him earlier that week. Harbor Pines Animal Rescue. He folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then, without understanding why, he felt a strange pull in his chest. The feeling lasted only a second, but hundreds of miles of memory suddenly felt much closer than before. Some mysteries survive simply because nobody thinks they matter anymore. The discovery happened late Sunday afternoon, while rain drifted softly across the shelter roof, and most visitors had already gone home. Harbor Pines felt unusually quiet. Only the distant hum of ventilation fans and the occasional bark echoed through the building. Megan was helping organize old storage cabinets in a back office rarely used except for archived records. Dust-coated cardboard boxes stacked along the walls. Forgotten folders filled metal shelves. Years of paperwork rested beneath a thin layer of neglect. She was searching for spare adoption forms when a weathered binder slipped from an upper shelf and landed at her feet. Several loose photographs spilled across the floor. Megan knelt to gather them. Most showed former shelter events. Adoption fairs, fundraisers, volunteer gatherings. Then one image caught her attention. She froze. The photograph was old and slightly faded. Rain had damaged one corner years earlier. Yet the dog in the picture looked unmistakably familiar. A young German shepherd stood proudly beside a man wearing outdoor work clothes. Her ears were tall, her posture confident, her eyes bright with energy. Around her neck rested the same worn leather collar she still wore today. Megan's pulse quickened. No way. She carried the photograph into Linda's office immediately. Linda adjusted her reading glasses and studied the image beneath the desk lamp. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. "That is her." Megan nodded. "It has to be." The date stamp in the corner was barely visible. Nearly 8 years old. Maybe older. Unfortunately, the right side of the photograph had suffered water damage. The man's face was partially missing. Only part of his shoulder and jawline remained visible. His identity had disappeared beneath a stain that time refused to erase. Linda carefully turned the photograph over. Nothing. No names. No notes. No location. Just a forgotten image hidden inside a forgotten binder. Yet somehow it changed everything. Until now, the shepherd's past existed only as theories. For the first time, evidence appeared. She belonged somewhere. She belonged to someone. Megan stared at the photograph again. The dog looked different back then. Happier. More alive. Not because she was younger. Because she was looking at the person beside her. The expression was impossible to miss. Trust. Loyalty. Love. "Do you think he ever looked for her?" Megan asked quietly. Linda glanced toward the kennel corridor beyond her office door. "I think she believes he did." Evening settled outside. Clouds darkened over the coastline. Volunteers completed final chores before heading home. Meanwhile, the old German shepherd remained beside her window. She seemed unaware of the discovery unfolding behind closed doors. Or perhaps she knew more than anyone realized. Linda eventually carried the photograph to Kennel 47. She crouched beside the gate and held it where the dog could see. At first, there was no reaction. Then something changed. The shepherd slowly rose to her feet. Her eyes locked onto the image. Not the collar. Not herself. The damaged figure standing beside her. For several long seconds, she stared without moving. The shelter faded into silence. Even Linda felt her breath catch. Then the dog gently pressed her nose against the photograph before lowering herself back onto the floor. No barking, no whining, just a quiet gesture filled with meaning nobody could fully understand. Linda looked down at the faded image once more. Somewhere out there existed a man whose face had nearly vanished from the photograph, but not from the memory of the dog lying before her. The question was no longer whether someone once loved her. The question was whether that person was still searching too. At that exact moment, several counties away, Noah Walker finished packing supplies for the volunteer shift he planned to attend the next morning. As he zipped his jacket, an old feeling surfaced unexpectedly. Familiar, unsettling, like hearing the distant echo of a voice he had not heard in years. He paused for a moment beside the window overlooking the ocean, then slowly turned toward the darkening horizon, unaware that a photograph waiting inside a shelter office had just begun telling a story neither time nor distance had managed to erase. Monday morning arrived with clear skies for the first time in nearly a week. Sunlight spilled across the Oregon coastline, turning the ocean into a sheet of silver and gold. Seagulls drifted above the harbor. Fishing boats moved slowly through the calm water. The storm had finally passed. At Harbor Pines Animal Rescue, volunteers welcomed the change. Windows stood partially open. Fresh ocean air flowed through the building. Dogs seemed more energetic than usual, their excitement echoing through the corridors. Yet in Kennel 47, the old German Shepherd followed her familiar routine. She sat beside the window. She watched the entrance. She waited. But something felt different this morning. Linda noticed it almost immediately. The dog's posture appeared sharper, more alert, not anxious, expectant, as if every sound carried new importance. Shortly after 10 o'clock, a pickup truck rolled into the parking lot. Dust rose behind the tires before, settling in the sunlight. Noah Walker stepped out and paused beside the vehicle. The shelter looked exactly as he imagined it would. Weathered cedar siding, white trim, flower boxes beneath the front windows. A simple place built by people who cared. He adjusted his jacket and headed toward the entrance. The scent of fresh coffee greeted him first. Then barking. Then laughter. Claire was already waiting near the front desk. "You made it." Noah smiled. "You sounded surprised." "A little." She handed him a volunteer badge. "Come on. I will show you around." Together they walked through the shelter corridors. Claire introduced staff members, explained feeding schedules, pointed out storage rooms and outdoor exercise areas. Noah listened carefully. He appreciated structure. Routine always felt comfortable, predictable, safe. Several dogs immediately demanded his attention. A beagle pressed against kennel bars hoping for scratches. A young retriever wagged hard enough to shake its entire body. Noah laughed more than he expected. The tension he carried into the building slowly began to ease. For the first time in weeks, he felt present, not trapped in memory, not focused on old regrets. Just here, helping, living. Meanwhile, farther down the corridor, the old German Shepherd remained motionless beside her window, until suddenly she was not. Her ears lifted first, then her head rose. Every muscle in her body tightened. Not from fear, recognition. A scent drifted through the shelter air. Faint, distant, nearly impossible to isolate among dozens of others. Yet something deep inside her responded instantly. The reaction surprised even her. She stood. For several seconds, she simply listened. Around her, other dogs barked and moved normally. Nobody noticed anything unusual. But Linda happened to glance toward Kennel 47 at exactly the right moment. She froze. The shepherd was standing perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the hallway beyond the corner. Her tail had begun to move. Slowly. Once. Then again. Linda stared in disbelief. 7 years. She had worked with this dog for 7 years. Never once had she witnessed such a response. Not for treats. Not for visitors. Not for potential adopters. The old shepherd stepped forward. Then another step. Then another. She reached the front of the kennel and stood waiting. Every instinct seemed focused on someone she could not yet see. At the opposite end of the building, Noah continued following Claire through the facility. They stopped occasionally to greet volunteers or discuss upcoming projects. He remained completely unaware of what was happening 50 yards away. Yet even he felt something unusual. A strange familiarity settled over him without explanation. A scent, a feeling, a memory brushing against the edge of consciousness. He slowed briefly near an intersection of hallways. "Everything okay?" Claire asked. Noah looked around. Yeah. He hesitated. This is going to sound strange. Try me. He glanced down the corridor ahead. For some reason, I feel like I have been here before. Claire smiled. Maybe it just feels like home. Neither realized how close those words were to the truth. Around the corner, the old German shepherd waited with growing anticipation, staring toward a hallway where footsteps were finally beginning to approach. Some moments arrive so quietly that nobody realizes life is about to change forever. Noah turned the corner at the end of the hallway and immediately stopped walking. He did not know why. 1 second, he was listening to Claire explain volunteer procedures. The next, every sound around him seemed distant. The corridor stretched ahead beneath warm fluorescent lights. Kennels lined both sides. Dogs barked. Tails wagged. Volunteers moved between doors carrying supplies. Yet Noah's attention locked onto a single enclosure near the far window. An old German shepherd stood waiting there, perfectly still, watching him. Claire noticed him pause. You okay? Noah nodded automatically, but his eyes never left the dog. Something about her felt familiar, not recognizable exactly. More like a memory buried so deeply he had forgotten it existed. The shepherd took one careful step forward, then another. Her tail moved slowly behind her. Not with excitement, with uncertainty, hope. Noah felt his chest tighten. The dog was older than any memory he carried. Gray covered much of her muzzle. One ear showed signs of an old injury. Time had softened her appearance. Yet those eyes, those amber eyes seemed strangely familiar. He found himself walking toward the kennel without thinking. Around him, conversations faded. Claire followed quietly. Linda emerged from a nearby office, immediately noticing the unusual scene. The shepherd had already reached the front gate. For years she had ignored visitors, refused attention, avoided connection. Now she stood pressed against the kennel door as though afraid the person approaching might disappear if she blinked. Noah slowed several feet away. His pulse quickened. The old feeling returned. Stronger now. He knelt carefully beside the enclosure. The German shepherd stared at him. Her ears trembled slightly. Her breathing quickened. Neither moved for several seconds. Noah studied her face. Something tugged at his memory. A training field beneath a summer sky. The scent of grass. The sound of paws racing across open ground. Long-forgotten emotions stirred beneath years of silence. Then his gaze drifted downward, toward the collar. Old leather, dark with age, cracked along the edges. Familiar, very familiar. His breath caught. Slowly, almost afraid of what he might discover, Noah moved closer. The dog never looked away. Neither did he. A memory surfaced. Not complete, just a fragment. A young German shepherd running beside him years ago. The same collar. The same intelligent eyes. The same unwavering attention. Impossible. His throat tightened. No, he whispered softly. Linda exchanged a confused glance with Claire. Noah reached toward the gate. The shepherd immediately pressed closer. Her tail moved faster now, not wagging wildly, trembling, as though every year of waiting rested inside that single moment. Noah swallowed hard. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Dakota. The reaction was instant. The old dog froze completely, every muscle locked in place. Silence seemed to sweep through the corridor. One heartbeat passed, then another. Tears filled Noah's eyes before he even understood why. Dakota's ears rose. Her mouth opened slightly. A small sound escaped her throat. Soft, broken, almost disbelieving. Then her tail began moving harder than anyone had ever seen. She stepped forward until her nose pressed against the gate between them. Noah's hands shook. Dakota. This time her answer came immediately. A joyful cry burst from somewhere deep inside her chest. Not loud, not desperate, pure recognition. 7 years vanished in an instant. The waiting, the loneliness, the unanswered questions. All of it disappeared beneath a single truth neither time nor distance had managed to erase. She knew that voice. And after all these years, she finally knew he had come back. For several minutes, nobody in the shelter moved. Volunteers stood frozen in the hallway. Claire covered her mouth with both hands. Linda felt tears gathering in her eyes before she realized she was crying. The old German shepherd remained pressed against the kennel gate, unable to look away from Noah. It was the kind of recognition that required no explanation, no commands, no proof, no documents. The years had changed both of them, but something deeper had survived untouched. Noah slowly reached through the bars, and rested his hand against her muzzle. Dakota leaned into the touch immediately. Her eyes closed. A long breath escaped her chest. It was not excitement anymore. It was relief. The kind that arrives after carrying a burden for far too long. "It really is you," Noah whispered. His voice trembled. He had spent years convincing himself that some chapters of life were over forever. Yet here she was, older, grayer, still wearing the same stubborn expression he remembered from long ago. Linda eventually found her voice. "You know her?" Noah nodded without looking away. "I think she was my partner." Silence followed. Then he corrected himself softly. "No, I know she was." Later that afternoon, they gathered in the shelter office. The faded photograph sat on the desk beneath a lamp. Old records covered every available surface. Linda brought out the intake files from 7 years earlier. Megan carefully examined the photograph again. Noah stared at it for several seconds before pointing toward the damaged figure. "That jacket." Everyone looked closer. "I used to wear one. Exactly like that." He turned the picture slightly. "And that patch on the shoulder. I recognize it." The room grew quiet again. Piece by piece, forgotten details began aligning. Linda retrieved the collar that Dakota had protected for so many years. Under careful lighting, the damaged stitching finally revealed what nobody had previously noticed. Hidden inside the folded leather rested a narrow strip of faded fabric. Age had nearly erased the writing. Almost. Megan held a magnifying glass above the cloth. The letters were difficult to read, broken by time, worn by weather. Yet one word remained visible. Dakota. Nobody spoke for several moments. The name felt sacred somehow, proof that the dog had carried her identity with her through every lonely year. Noah lowered his head and smiled through tears. "You kept it." That evening, several phone calls were made. Archived records were requested. Former contacts answered questions. Old files stored in forgotten databases resurfaced. The process took hours. Then finally, the missing pieces appeared. Years earlier, after a chaotic series of administrative transfers involving multiple agencies and shelters, Dakota's identification records had become separated from her location information. The chain-linking dog and handler simply disappeared inside paperwork. No malice, no conspiracy, just human error multiplied over time. Noah had searched for answers. Dakota had waited for his return. Neither knew how close they had come to finding each other on more than one occasion. 7 years had slipped past because of missing information and unanswered questions. Yet somehow neither had truly let go. As sunset painted the Oregon sky with shades of gold and amber, Noah returned to the kennel. Dakota rose the moment she saw him. This time there was no uncertainty, no searching, no waiting. He opened the gate and sat beside her on the floor. The old shepherd rested her head against his shoulder exactly as if no time had passed at all. Outside, evening light shimmered across the ocean. Inside the shelter, a story everyone believed was finished had quietly found its missing ending. The drive home took nearly 2 hours, but neither of them seemed to notice. The Oregon coast unfolded beyond the windshield in a ribbon of ocean cliffs, evergreen forests, and sunlight dancing across distant waves. Noah drove with one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. Dakota lay quietly on a blanket across the passenger side floorboard, her head lifted just enough to watch him from time to time. Every few minutes their eyes met. Every time, the same expression returned to her face. Calm, certain, as though she was making sure this was real, as though she expected the dream to disappear if she looked away too long. It never did. The small cedar house overlooking the inlet appeared just before sunset. Golden light spilled across the water below the bluff. Wind carried the scent of salt and pine through the air. Noah parked and stepped out first. Dakota followed more slowly. Age had stiffened her joints, but there was energy in her movements now that nobody at the shelter had seen in years. She paused near the porch steps and surveyed her surroundings. The weathered deck, the rocking chair beside the front door, the flower pots waiting for spring blooms. Then she looked at Noah. He smiled. "Welcome home, girl." The words seemed to settle deep inside her. Together they entered the house. Warm afternoon light streamed through the windows. The interior was simple. A wood stove stood against one wall. Books lined several shelves. A worn leather chair faced the water. It was not a large home, but it felt peaceful. Dakota moved carefully from room to room, exploring each corner with quiet curiosity. She inspected the kitchen, sniffed the hallway, paused beside the bedroom doorway. Then eventually she returned to the living room, where Noah stood watching her. Something surprised him almost immediately. She never once looked toward the front door. For 7 years, she had watched entrances, gates, roads, parking lots, anything that might deliver the person she missed. Yet now she seemed interested only in the place itself, as if the search had ended the moment she stepped inside. Evening settled gently across the coastline. Noah prepared dinner while Dakota rested nearby. The old shepherd accepted her meal happily, then curled on a thick blanket beside the wood stove. Outside, darkness slowly covered the inlet. Lights from distant fishing boats flickered across the water like scattered stars. The house felt different somehow. Fuller, warmer, less empty than it had the night before. Later, Noah sat in his chair holding the faded photograph recovered from the shelter archives. The damaged image rested in his hands while Dakota slept nearby. He studied the younger versions of both of them captured inside that forgotten moment. Time had changed their appearances. Added gray hair, added silver fur, added years neither could recover. Yet the connection remained exactly the same. Eventually, he folded the photograph carefully and placed it beside the old leather collar. The hidden strip bearing Dakota's name rested safely inside once more. Some treasures did not need replacing. They simply needed protecting. Near midnight, the fire burned low. Wind whispered softly through the cedar trees outside. Noah glanced toward Dakota one final time before heading to bed. The sight stopped him in the doorway. For the first time since arriving home, she had fallen completely asleep. Her paws twitched occasionally as dreams carried her somewhere peaceful. Her breathing remained slow and steady. Most importantly, she was not positioned beside the front door. She was not facing the window. She was not watching the road. Instead, she slept beside his chair, exactly where she wanted to be, exactly where she belonged. Noah smiled quietly and turned off the lamp. Outside, the Pacific Ocean continued its endless conversation with the shore. Inside, two old friends rested beneath the same roof once more. 7 years of waiting had finally ended. Not with fanfare, not with celebration, just with a sleeping dog, a grateful man, and the quiet grace of finding home again.